Good morning to you, and thank you so much for finding time to be with us this day, the 17th of October 2022. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and joining us from. My name is Miriam Ogoto. The show is Good Morning Africa, and I get you up to date with the latest happenings from across the continent of Africa. So before we get into some detailed news bulletin, let's first look at the headlines from across the continent, and we start with those from Kenya. The Standard newspaper, Ruto's fatal blow to killer police squad. President says he ordered the closure of the unit after officers turned into killers instead of protectors. The breakup opens the can of worms, that is extrajudicial killings and a force in dalliance with the underworld. The story is on page 13. Past ghost return to haunt CS nominees. The story is on page 10 and 12. Costlier loans after banks raise interest. You'll find that on the business section on page 25. Liverpool and Man City's unbeaten run on the sports pages on page 40. Big interview Museveni on long reign. Twitterati general and succession. Ugandan president feels he still has enough fuel in the tank to continue ruling after 36 years in power and does not rule out his son taking over. His dream is to see a fully integrated East African community. That is an exclusive interview on the Standard newspaper on page 4 and 5. Nairobi named best destination in Africa. Kenya has been named Africa's leading destination, while Nairobi has also been named the best business travel destination. The 29th World Travel Awards also named KICC continent's leading conference center. That story is on page 3, and I think there is some good news there, especially for that industry that has suffered due to COVID-19. Perhaps that will help in raking in more business from across the world, and congratulations to Kenya and indeed to Nairobi. The Star newspaper, the main headline, KPC heat for plan to use old oil pipes for water. Union says crude oil pipeline poses serious health risks if used to convey domestic water. The story is on page 2. The main headline, Mudavadi fastest cabinet nominees face vetting panel. And I think the vetting session has already started there. Vetting of the Hustler cabinet nominees starts with 5 picks of President William Ruto facing MPs today. First to appear before the panel, chaired by Speaker Moses Wetangula, is ANC boss Musalia Mudavadi. If approved as Prime Cabinet Secretary, Musalia will become the 3rd highest ranking member of the Ruto executive, and of course some familiar faces that will also appear there today. And that story is on page 4, 5 and 6. Suspect in Ida Odinga bodyguard murder arrested, pistol recovered. You find that on page 3. Give me space to work for Kenyans, Ruto tells Raila, somewhere up there. That is on page 8. We turn our attention now to the Daily Nation. Why I disbanded crack police unit. An investigation report on the disappearance of 2 Indian nationals and their local taxi driver was presented to President Ruto last week, precipitated the disbandment of the special unit, SSU, an elite squad in the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, now accused of being behind extrajudicial killings. The story is on page 2 and 3. Jobs dropouts beat graduates. Okay, it's interesting. We find that on page 10 and 11. D-Day for Ruto CS nominees. We've talked about that on the other papers. State can't account for 9 billion Kenya shillings spent on fiber optic project. Okay, I'm fixing Uhuru's mess, says Ruto. That is on page 4. It's Xi's party at China's historic 20th Congress. Chinese leader expected to set out his vision for his historic 3rd term in power. That is on page 22. And why poverty in Kenya is not by default but politically designed. I think that is an opinion piece, and you will find that on page 14 on the Daily Nation. Let me just look at some of the papers from across the continent of Africa. The Daily Monitor from Uganda, tight Ebola rules as 4 exams start. Okay. And then New Vision, also from Uganda, another 3,400 circles cleared for parish cash. And a Newsday, ED pressures party on PVO's bill. That is from Zimbabwe. Daily News, also from Zimbabwe, stillbirth awaits 3rd way plans. And the Citizen from Tanzania, Kigoma linked to the national grid at last. And the Guardian from Nigeria, but no, from what do you call it, from Tanzania, Samia, current birth rate hurts social services. That is interesting. The Nation from Nigeria, outrage over Atiku's don't vote for Yoruba-Igbo remark. And The Punch, fresh trouble hits Atiku over anti-Yoruba-Igbo comment. And The Daily Telegraph, mordant, we need stability, not soap opera. That is the main headline. And The Guardian, Truth fights for survival as Tory rebel MPs warn that game is up. Okay, all right. So that is what we have, and some of the newspapers from Kenya and others from outside the continent, and of course a few from the continent. So thank you so much. You're now up to date. Now let's just get into the bulletin, and we start with the latest. Being a Monday, a lot happened over the weekend, so let me just bring us up to date. Tigray's rebel forces in northern Ethiopia region have called on the international community to enforce an immediate ceasefire between them and the Ethiopian government or help them defend themselves, the group said in a statement on Twitter. The Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, called for an international community to compel the Eritrean army to withdraw from Tigray and press the Ethiopian government to come to the negotiating table. The TPLF said it will be forced to fight or if nothing was done. It said it was ready to respect an immediate cessation of hostilities if the Ethiopian government were compelled to negotiate for peace. And we move on to another news, this time in Angola. And President João Lourenço delivered his first speech before the National Assembly since his re-election, admitting to devoting all his strength and attention to the search for the best conditions for the population. The speech comes a few weeks after his re-election for his second term. Angola, one of Africa's largest oil producers, is also grappling with higher public debts. Higher oil prices in 2022 have helped Angola reduce public debt to 56.5% of gross domestic product in 2022, down from 79.7% in 2021 and 123.8% in 2020. The return of the ruling, formerly Marxist Popular Movement of the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, has been met by opposition. To some, the country needs to address pressing matters like education reforms and other infrastructure. We go to Burkina Faso, and a young army captain who led the latest coup in Burkina Faso on Friday was unanimously named interim president until elections are held in July 2024, two members of the ruling junta told AFP. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, 34, led disgruntled junior officers in the second coup in 8 months to hit the jihadist-torn West African country. Some 300 delegates from political parties, social and religious groups, security forces, unions, as well as people displaced by jihadist violence took part in a national forum on Friday. Held in the capital Ouagadougou, it discussed the country's future before power is supposed to return to civilians. Another junta member confirmed the move. 2 weeks ago, Traoré toppled Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba. Damiba himself had seized power only in January, forcing out Burkina's last elected president, Roch-Marc Christian Kabore. The forum adopted Article 5 of a transition charter, which stipulates that the head of the Patriotic Movement for Preservation and Restoration, MPSR, as the junta chose to call itself, assumes the position of transition president, head of state, and supreme chief of the National Armed Forces, the two sources said. Traoré has been head of the MPSR since the September 30th coup. The forum also adopted an article in the charter which says the transition's president's mandate ends with the inauguration of a president resulting from elections planned in 2024. It adds that the transition president is not eligible to stand in presidential, legislative and local elections organized to end the transition period. Head back to Ethiopia. And Ethiopia has ordered banks to deny foreign currency to businesses importing non-priority goods in an effort to shore up dwindling foreign reserves in one of Africa's major economies. The move effectively freezes the import of dozens of items such as alcohol and cars, as businesses must register with banks to obtain the foreign currency needed to bring goods into the country. In a letter to Ethiopia's central bank, the Ministry of Finance said it had become necessary to restrict the use of foreign currency to importing food, medicine and medical equipment and raw materials for manufacturing. In late March, the National Bank of Ethiopia indicated reserves had fallen to $1.6 billion at the end of 2021, covering less than 2 months' worth of imports, according to local newspaper. The report showed a largely importing country, Ethiopia, is in structural shortage of foreign currency, the French Treasury said in a periodic bulletin this month. Ethiopian authorities have also recently tightened laws on foreign currency holdings for individuals and businesses and banned all foreign currency transactions in Ethiopia. We go to Nigeria, and about 500 people and more are believed to have died in Nigeria's worst flooding in a decade, with further 1.4 million people displaced from their homes. The heavy downfalls have hit huge swaths of the country and affected people in all walks of life. Floods caused by abundant rains and poor infrastructure have affected the vast areas of the country, sparking fears of food shortage and high inflation. Fuel scarcity has already caused long queues at petrol stations in the capital Abuja this week after tankers were blocked by floods in neighboring states. The rainy season typically ends in November in northern states and in December in the south, and more damage to people and property is likely to be more before then. We go to Tunisia, and thousands of Tunisians took to the street of the capital Tunis on Saturday in protest at President Kais Saied, who they blame for severe economic crisis, including food shortages and soaring inflation. Led by the National Salvation Front, a coalition of opposition parties, demonstrators marched through the main streets of Tunis, calling on the president to stop down. Many protesters chanted, "Go away," revolt against Kais, the dictator, and the people want to sack the president. Tunisia's debt far exceeds the GDP of the country, and the government is now negotiating with the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for a loan of about $2 billion. Basic products such as flour, sugar and coffee are in short supply, and crises such as COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine have increased the cost of imports such as cereals. The country has also been hampered by serious political crisis since President Saied seized full power in July 2021. And we go to Uganda, and the President Yoweri Museveni has ordered an immediate lockdown and imposition of a dusk till dawn curfew for 3 weeks in 2 districts in a bid to stop the spread of Ebola. Places of worship, markets, bars and entertainment will be closed, and restrictions have been placed on movement in and out of the 2 central districts of Mubende and Kasanda for 21 days. The Health Ministry said on Saturday that there have been 19 deaths, 58 confirmed cases of the often fatal viral hemorrhagic fever since the outbreak was first reported on September 20th. Authorities say the outbreak is concentrated in the 2 affected districts and has not reached Kampala, the capital of 1.5 million people, despite a husband and a wife testing positive there. The Ugandan president, however, said cargo trucks will be allowed to enter and leave the 2 areas, but all other transport has been suspended. Museveni had already ordered traditional healers to stop treating sick people and ordered police to arrest anyone suspected of having contracted the virus who refused to go into isolation. Ebola is spread through bodily fluids, with common symptoms being fever, vomiting, bleeding, diarrhea. Outbreaks are difficult to contain, especially in urban environments. Uganda's last recorded death from the previous Ebola outbreak was in 2019. The particular strain now circulating in Uganda is known as the Sudan Ebola virus, for which there is currently no vaccine. The African Union's chief has called for an immediate unconditional ceasefire in the 2-year conflict in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region. An AU statement released on Saturday said Chairperson Musa Faki Mahamat is following with great concerns reports of increased fighting in the Tigray region and is calling for an immediate ceasefire and urging the resumption of humanitarian services. The chairperson urges the party to recommit to dialogue as per the agreement. Added that statement, Ethiopian government forces have been engaged in fighting with Tigray's People's Liberation Front (TPLF) rebels since November 2020. The text refers to AU-led peace talks that are expected to take place in South Africa in what will be the first formal negotiations between the 2 sides since the start of the conflict in 2020. No date has been fixed yet for the meeting after it was postponed, with no new date set in early October for logistical reasons. And then we head to Somalia, and the government on Saturday threatened to sanction businesses that pay tax extortion money to Al-Shabaab and looking to choke a lucrative cash pipeline the Islamist militants used to fund a deadly insurgency. Somalia's Ministry of Commerce and Industry say the full force of the law would be brought against traders who pay the Al-Qaeda ally, which experts say raises millions of dollars through a complex and extensive taxation system. The ministry said any business found to have paid or collaborated with Al-Shabaab in any way would face a legal action, including having the government issue trading permits revoked. Al-Shabaab has been trying to overthrow the central government in Mogadishu for more than 15 years now and regularly stages deadly bombings and armed attacks on civilians and military targets. Despite an international effort to degrade the group, the Militants control continues on the countryside and use threats of violence to collect taxes in territory under their jurisdiction. The group taxes real estate, road cargo at the checkpoints and slabs customs on imports passing through the capital's main port, according to a 2020 report by the Mogadishu-based Hiral Institute. The think tank then estimated Al-Shabaab raised at least $15 million a month, rivaling the government's own tax collection efforts. Okay, now that is something right there. And we end with some news from, not the end, we move on to Nigeria. We're back to Nigeria again. And Nigeria's prosecutors say they will appeal a court's decision to drop terrorism charges against separatist leader Nnamdi Kanu. An appeals court dismissed the charges on Thursday, saying a lower court had no authority in the case and that Kanu was illegally extradited from Kenya. Kanu leads the indigenous people of Biafra, a group that wants to break away from Nigeria, and the government has labeled a terrorist organization. Nigeria's Attorney General Abubakar Malami responded to Thursday's ruling in a statement saying the separatist is discharged but not acquitted. Malami said authorities will explore legal steps to revisit the court's decision. He said the court failed to take into account issues that took place before Nnamdi Kanu was extradited to Nigeria from Kenya last year. A three-judge panel of an appeals court on Thursday ruled that Kanu's trial was unlawful and said authorities flouted international treaties to abduct the leader. The court said the circumstances surrounding his arrest did not give the government the jurisdiction to continue to keep him on trial. The court also ruled that the government did not provide clear evidence of when, where Kanu committed the many allegations against him. Kanu is leading a movement to break off southeastern Nigeria from the rest of the country to form a republic called Biafra. A previous Biafra independence movement led to a civil war between 1967 to 1970 that killed an estimated 1 million people. On Friday, as news of Kanu's court discharge spread, so did excitement in Nigeria's southwest region. And we end our news from South Sudan. The SSPDF command has deployed an unknown number of troops to the border between the disputed region of Abyei and Twig County following last week's deadly fighting, a government official from Abyei has confirmed. On Monday, 12 people were killed and a dozen others injured after clashes erupted in a net town between the youth of Abyei and their counterparts from Twig County in Warrap State. To prevent the further eruption of violence, Ajak Deng, the Minister of Information, said hundreds of South Sudanese People's Forces were dispatched to the border between the two conflicting communities. The communal clashes there were triggered by a border dispute in February this year. The conflict between these communities has continued to escalate despite their previous commitment to the cessation of hostilities agreement in northern Bahr el Ghazal state capital, Awil, in April this year. An investigative committee led by Vice President Hussein Abeldage brought the two communities of Ngok and Dinka of Abyei, a disputed region between South Sudan and Sudan, and Twig Warrap State to sign the broken ceasefire. And you are now up to date. That is the latest news from the continent of Africa. And being a Monday, we were just doing a recap of what happened, I think, from Friday to over the weekend now. So apparently, according to Nigeria's government, Nnamdi Kanu is not free yet. Not yet. Uhuru, as we would say here in Kenya. So very interesting. I think the Attorney General has appealed the ruling by the court. And maybe just a quick recap of that news. So and of course, in their ruling, they said even in the manner that Nnamdi Kanu was abducted, and that's, I think, the words that they used, from Kenya, did not follow the proper channels that are laid out. There are laws that are international, public international laws. That's what they are. So once they've been made in these international institutions, and we all agree, and you're party to such institutions that, like some of them, United Nations charters and AU charters and all this, and you are, as a country, a member of these global organizations. So what happens is you domesticate these rules. So as much as it is an international law, but also it has to be effective back at home if you have ratified the charter and you're part of the people or the countries that adhere to this law. So anyway, the Nigerian government, according to the ruling on Thursday, was found to have violated some of these laws, and the 3-judge panel of an appeal court on Thursday ruled that Kanu's trial was unlawful and said authorities flouted international treaties to abduct the separatists. But I think from this story, what I find to be interesting, and I think on this one, the court seems to have acted very independently, looking at the facts that were brought before the court in relation to this case. And this is what they said. The court ruled that the government did not provide clear evidence of when and where. So you can't just purport that this person is a terrorist, this person has done this, and yet you don't have proof, because these are very serious allegations. These are very serious allegations that were leveled against Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra. So if you were to bring this case and say this is what he has done, then surely you must have some facts to back up what you're saying, these allegations, because the court, as we all know, operates by the facts, not mere say, not stories, not something emerging, not something that you overheard or you think is what is happening. You must provide proof. So if you're saying that Nnamdi Kanu is a terrorist, as one of the charges was saying, then you have to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that this is our supporting fact, that indeed this person is a terrorist, okay? So you can't just take somebody to court. He's been held there for over 1 year. There's no evidence. Even the court said he's been held, in a way that is unlawful. Okay, and so you have to show the evidence has to be clear. Those terrorist activities, when and where were they committed? And you have proof. In this day of, access of information is very easy. Surely the government should have done a better job to back up their case. So they were unable, because we know a lot of these issues were really fabricated. Because there's no proof, and of course we know the reason why that he was arrested is because he's leading the IPOB nation, and he's demanding for a referendum so that Biafra can become its own country. The agitation. So the prosecutors have said they will appeal and. A court's decision to drop terrorism charges against, Nnamdi Kanu, and so they're saying he's not free yet, not yet, and yet the court ruled that he was free. So I guess he's not been. I'm not sure if he has been released from custody yet. If any of you knows, then you can let me know if at all he's still being held. And I think if he's still being held, then it's against the Constitution, because even if the prosecutors are going to appeal this case, the fact that the court released him, he should be released and maybe held within but shouldn't. And then they can go on ahead with the appeal. They should not appeal this court while Nnamdi Kanu is still under police custody. I think that is unlawful and a violation of his human rights, and I think that has been a constant thing that has come up even through his lawyers, a violation of his rights. And Nigerian government and how it deals with some of these things is very interesting. I'm reminded of that case of the Sahara founder. I can't remember his name clearly. that journalist. I think he was arrested. He had worn a T-shirt that said that we are all Biafrans or we are all Igbos or something like that, and he was coming to the country from Spain, I believe. It's some years ago. I might have forgotten the details of that story. And he was arrested in a similar fashion, put to custody. No, no proper charges. The charges that were brought against him, they could not substantiate. The court ruled for him to be released. They continued holding him against, the court decision. So Nigeria is not known very well to respect the rule of law. So if you're a country that operates within the parameters of the rule of law, then one of those things is you must respect, whether you agree with the court's decision or not, but you must respect a decision from the court. And even if it means the public prosecutor is going to appeal this case, that this man is supposed to be out of police custody. I don't know if he's out yet, but according to the government, Nnamdi Kanu is not free yet. He's not free yet because they're appealing this. And I think they were not very happy with the court's decision to drop the terrorism charges against, Nnamdi Kanu. So I guess we have to wait and see how that will play out. And if at all, the court will grant them whatever it is that they are seeking to get. But the court was very clear. The court was absolutely very clear. This person was arrested, was abducted in a way that is unlawful. Okay, and the authorities in Nigeria flouted international treaties. These international treaties that you ratify as a country, you domesticate them back to your country. So you're supposed to respect them, the government of Nigeria or any other government across the world. Once you're part of the treaties and you're ratified and you've agreed to operate and to adopt these treaties, they become laws down in your country. So you can't choose when and how to apply them. You're supposed to apply them as they are. So that was flouted. So let's see what will happen there. I think I'll be following this story very, very carefully. Do any of you know, I see a good number of you there today, do any of you know if at all he's being held or he has been released? Because the government has said, no, he's not yet free. They're appealing, so I don't know. But from that ruling, he was supposed to have been released the same day, even as the government or, the government prosecutor goes to appeal this ruling, but he was supposed to be out of custody while they do that. Okay, and if at all they have a case, and then, the next step should be followed. But if he's still being held, then that also violates the international treaty and also violates his own rights. But like I said, the government of Nigeria is not known to be a government that follows its own laws and its own, treaties that it has ratified as a country. So that is the interesting part, but not really interesting when someone's life is in. So it's not been, from what I see you writing, Chinadu. Thank you so much. You're saying he's not yet been released. So I think that is also against the Constitution. That is against the Constitution. Okay, absolutely, that is against the Constitution. And so what the Attorney General was saying, Abubakar Malami, the Attorney General of Nigeria, he was saying the authorities will explore legal steps to revisit the court's decision, and he said the court failed to take into account issues that took place before Nnamdi Kanu was extradited to Nigeria from Kenya last year. So that is what that is part of why he feels he wants to appeal. But what the court is saying, can you provide us with evidence? Okay, fine, you're saying this person is a terrorist, this person committed this and that. Because, remember his charge sheet was very long, and then after a while it was reduced, but, the terrorism charges were there. The court is saying, provide us evidence. When and where did these terrorist activities or act or something happen? Do you have evidence? Because the court looked at the facts. That's what it does. You provide it with evidence, and then it's able to rule from the material, from the evidence that you have provided. So you can't keep insisting, and yet you can't back up your case. You must be able to back up your case, all right? You must be able to back up your case. You're unable to do that. So let's see how this appeal will go, I suppose. You must provide very clear evidence. That is what is required when you're going to a court. So we shall leave that there for right now, because I want us to look at the AU's letter over the weekend over what is happening in Ethiopia and the crisis and the hotspot that atrocities continue to happen here in the continent. Quite sad the turn in which this conflict in Ethiopia is taking. Now, the African Union's chief has called for an immediate and conditional ceasefire in the 2-year-old conflict in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region. An AU statement released on Saturday by the chairperson, Musa Mohamed Faki, said his office is following with great concern reports of increased fighting because Tigray region is being bombarded by two forces, by the Ethiopian forces on one side and by the Eritrean forces on the other side. And Eritrea drafted young people, the same drafting that a lot of young people running away from Russia, being forced to go into a war that you don't even want to get engaged with. That is what happened in Eritrea. So a lot of young people are recruited and they were tasked to go and get on with the fighting. The TPLF and also the Ethiopian government is bombarding them on this other side. So this has really caused an increase of suffering from the people who have been caught up in what is happening there. And the AU chairperson, as I say, they're saying they're following, the African Union is following this with a lot of concern. The chairperson urges the parties to recommit to dialogue as per their agreement. There's an agreement that was signed some times back for a ceasefire. You can't have mediation, and I think that is the conversation we were having here last time. You can't purport to have a mediation, that was hurriedly put across by the African Union, which I think we talked about it. Musa Faki didn't really think through the details of what a mediation of such nature should entail. So they were ill prepared, and I think that is all the Tigrayan organizations they were also saying, and I think I agree with them. So now, of course, that was supposed to happen a week ago, the other weekend, some days back, but that did not happen because one of the key mediators, the former president of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta, was supposed to, together with the former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, to lead this mediation, efforts. But President Kenyatta, I think he was not told in good time, so he couldn't really he couldn't be available for that mediation. And for the TPLF, they're very comfortable to have him. They've been asking for him to be part of the mediation process. So now a new date has not been set, even as the people continue to suffer in Ethiopia. This is becoming a human catastrophe in the levels that perhaps a genocide is actively happening in Ethiopia. We must call this by what it is. A genocide is actively happening right now in Ethiopia. Call it by any other name. That is what is happening. When this place has been bombarded by Eritrea on the other side, by Ethiopian forces on this other side. Of course, the TPLF are also fighting, but of course with these two forces, they have been overwhelmed. And so they are now calling, I think there's an item I did earlier, they're now calling for the international community. The Tigray rebels now urge global push for Ethiopian ceasefire. They're now calling, they're begging for a ceasefire because a lot of people are suffering there. And, they were open for the dialogue that AU had intended to mediate through, but that did not happen. So meanwhile, what happens? People continue to suffer, and the Tigray rebel forces in northern Ethiopia region has called on the international community to enforce an immediate ceasefire between them and Ethiopian government to help them defend themselves, the group said in a statement on Twitter. Okay, so I think something needs to be done here urgently. Musa Faki, it's not enough. It's not enough for you to put up a statement. We need something. We need a very a solution. We need a solution immediately for this conflict that is happening in Ethiopia. We need people to speak against what is happening, the genocide that is ongoing in Ethiopia. We need people to to make this, to bring this to the attention of the world. I know people somehow know what is happening, but it's not receiving the attention that it's supposed to be receiving. Because when you look at the figures, of course, we know the Ethiopian government has really controlled the access to information from that region. So you really can't, you don't know exactly what is happening. But from the little information we are getting from this region, things are not okay for the people, for the innocent civilians who have been caught up in this war. And this war, of course, started in 2020. We've talked about it here. I will not get into the details of the history of that, but that is what is happening. And I think it's a very sad state of affairs, and Africans are just going on about their lives as if nothing is really happening. I don't know what IGAD is doing. I don't know what IGAD is doing. I don't know what, I think AU needs to do more. I don't know what else AU can do, but AU needs to do more to put pressure on the Ethiopian government to come to the table, and the Tigrayan, the TPLF also to come to the table and mediate through this and have a solution. The senseless losing of innocent lives is unacceptable, and we should not just sit and watch as a continent. So we should say something. We should pressure the African Union to, other than just putting up a statement, to go further and seek to find quick solutions for at least an immediate ceasefire of what is happening there. Okay, sorry. Okay, so now we move on to Burkina Faso, and the young captain who led the coup that took place on a few days ago. He's 34 years old. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, and on Friday he was unanimously named interim president until elections are held in July 2024. I don't know why I have a feeling that another coup in Burkina Faso is on the offing. I just feel like this will not sit right. Maybe with the soldiers that were supporting Damiba, who had removed President Roch Kabore. Remember, Christian Roch Kabore was disposed in January this year. He was removed. So there could be some other sections of the army that are uncomfortable. And when you look at these young army officials, you mean to tell me the older generals are just sitting there and just doing nothing? I don't think so. So if I feel like 2024 is too far for an election. An election in Burkina Faso should be arranged and done as quick as possible so that we can return the leadership of the country to the civilians, and then the army can march back to the barracks. That's where they should stay. That is where they should belong, and maybe go and protect the borders of Burkina Faso. We know right now they should be fighting the insurgency. That is also another thing that, a problem that made these army officials to remove President, Christian Roch Kabore, the insecurity. So they have things that they're supposed to be doing as an army. So they need to march back to the barracks and go secure the borders of the country and let a civilian-ruled government do what it does, and that is leading the country. It is a democratic state. Okay? So they're planning for an election in 2024, and I've said, and I'll reiterate again, it's too far. It's too far. I wish it was maybe next year. I wish, he said, we need six months to organize for an election. That will make sense, so that an election is done and they have a new leader. Because this will be a recipe for a chaos in Burkina Faso that has already so much to deal with right now, as in many other countries in the Sahel region. Another part of the army will come and will conduct another coup. So it will be coup, counter coups, and counter coups, and before you know it, Burkina Faso will plunge into a civil strife like what you see in some of these countries across the continent of Africa. So I wish ECOWAS, I know ECOWAS have been having a lot of hard time in that region, but I wish ECOWAS, if at all, can talk to them about having an election as early I know Damiba was very sketchy about when he felt the country needed to have an election. Now, the reason why I'm saying that there could be another coup in the offing, I don't have the details, and I'm not a security intelligence officer, but I think some of these things are very obvious, and sometimes you talk about them here, and they do happen actually, because you can see, if you look at the politics and the circumstances surrounding some of these things in these countries. So now, this new Kanu, his name is Ibrahim Traore, he said he has overhauled the army. Who overhauls the army of a country? And then I don't know what else he has overhauled. So right now he is the head of government. He is what else? He's been given a couple of. He's the head of state. He is the position of the transition president. He's the supreme chief of the National Armed Forces, and all that. So he's been given some powers over here. And then in that agreement that was signed on Friday, well, the elections are planned to be held in 2024. He's not eligible to stand. So what will happen to him? He'll go back to the army. I'm sure he can't be allowed to go back to the army. I mean, he led a coup. So I don't know if he'll be able to go back to the army. Or what will happen to this young general? See? And also, when you say that you have suspended the country's, military for whatever that means, in whatever context that could be meaning there in Burkina Faso, I don't know. I think elections should be held in Burkina Faso as soon as possible so that that country can get back to the business of dealing with very pressing matters like the insurgency that is really ripping apart the Sahel region. Burkina Faso is in turmoil, Mali is in turmoil, Niger, Chad, Nigeria in the west. A lot is happening. So they need to get back to the things that really matter to the people there. Because as long as they keep staying there, it might not end very well for that country. Okay. Another country that seems to be in turmoil is Tunisia. President Kais Saied also overhauled a lot of things, including parliament, including judiciary, he's just ruling by decree there in Tunisia. And Tunisia was a country that set off the Arab uprising. Remember in 2011? So I've been saying here for the longest time that President Kais Saied is really playing with fire. Over here. So there were demonstrations over the weekend, on Saturday particularly, and the protesters was blaming President Kais Saied for the severe economic problems, including food shortages and the soaring inflation, and they really want him to go. And there have been calls for him to resign. But I guess he's having very strong backers. I've not heard the international community really talk about what is happening in Tunisia. So that tells you there are a few Western powers, because usually they're very quick to, such cases across Africa really comes to their attention very fast, and they're very quick to issue sanctions, they're very quick to respond and issue moratoriums and things like that. But I haven't seen them comment or be very much invested in what is happening in Tunisia, and that can only tell you one thing. They're probably backing this regime, they're probably backing this regime, or they know what they're benefiting right now from Tunisia, and so their hands are tied and they really can't do much or say much. So that is the latest. News. I'll leave that there, and of course that news from Nigeria we shall be following. I guess that appeal by the Nigerian prosecutors who are against, they're saying they're going to appeal, that ruling by the court on Thursday that said Nnamdi Kanu should be released, but the Nigerian prosecutors and the Attorney General Abubakar Malami has said that he's not yet been acquitted. He's just been discharged. I don't know, is that difference? I'm not a legal mind. When you've been discharged, You're supposed to be acquitted, right? Why are you still being held? When you've been discharged, being discharged and being acquitted, is there quite a difference there? If you've been discharged, your case has been dismissed. The next logical thing is for you to be acquitted, but the Attorney General is saying that is not the same thing, and so they're appealing to that ruling. So that is something that we shall be following for you, and we shall be bringing you the latest even as we continue to receive the information as it comes there from Nigeria. And of course, the story of Ethiopia also, we shall be following that for you, and the happenings in other countries like Burkina Faso, and the Somalia government now warning businesses not to pay extortion money to Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab has been funding its activities by collecting taxes from people in some rural areas in Somalia where the government forces perhaps are not there. So some areas that Al-Shabaab has taken over, so the government is not effective in as far as administration in these areas. So Al-Shabaab have been having a field day. In fact, there's a story I was reading on Al Jazeera about 2 weeks ago that said in these areas, the Al-Shabaab have their own even legal process. They have their own courts, and the residents in these areas prefer to go to the Al-Shabaab courts because they feel Al-Shabaab rules very fairly. Yes. They feel Al-Shabaab. So they have a parallel government running. And from this story, Al-Shabaab is raising more taxes. It's matching what the government is raising. Can you imagine? So this is this a whole government by itself there in Somalia. Not funny, but now the government is warning these businesses that if you pay taxes, we are coming for you. Well, first protect these people, because if you don't protect them, now if Al-Shabaab is even operating courts there, they have a name for it, and that means they have established their administrative systems in these areas that they have influence. You can't tell people not to pay taxes to Al-Shabaab unless you ensure them or you assure them that they are protected. You have to make sure these people are protected. All right? If they don't pay taxes, Al-Shabaab will kill them. So you need to reinforce that, your presence in this area so that they are protected and Al-Shabaab will not get an opportunity to come and collect these taxes. And Al-Shabaab has been trying to overthrow the central government in Mogadishu for the last 15 years plus, and regularly stages deadly bombings and armed attacks on civilian and military agents. I think we're all familiar with that. So I think that is the latest from the continent of Africa. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Miriam Magoto. I'll see you much later. Bye-bye for now.